Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro, a slice of news, culture, and conversation. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, many of us spend a lot of time on screens.
We do, Tia, we do. What about kids? At what age is it appropriate, or healthy even, for them to get their first device?
Plus, we sit down with the new chair of the Michigan Republican Party to see how he plans to steer the Michigan GOP.
Also, we'll explore growing concerns in Ferndale over a surveillance system. Some residents worry it could disproportionately target Black residents.
And we'll learn how one group is making the sport of lacrosse more accessible to kids in Detroit. But first,
it happens when it rains a lot, but this time it was just too much. It's way too cold, no heater, no water, just flooding. The water all over the backyard, front yard, up to the porch stairs. It was bad.
I am proud of everything. Even the city, I know they're limited. I think, we do need to maybe step it up a little bit more in the quality of some things, but everybody's trying their best.
It's wild. It's going to be crazy out here for the next few months.
Those are the voices of various Southwest Detroit residents reacting to streets and basements flooding after a 54-inch water main broke on Beard and Rowan Streets 2 weeks ago. Detroit's Water Department director said it was the worst water main break he'd seen in his 10 years of running the department.
Yeah, Tia, the scenes were pretty bad. The flooding affected 400 households. The city and community organizations have been coming together to provide aid to Southwest residents whose homes were flooded. Last week, Anita Zavala from the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation was on the Metro to provide an update of those efforts.
It's a process. The city, they are working very hard, and I appreciate that they're meeting with the community organizations. We are meeting with them every single day at 3 o'clock to talk about what we're seeing on the ground, what the community needs are, how they can be addressed, and they're responding. And it's changing in real time. It wasn't a natural disaster, but it's a disaster. And it's a first time for all of the city kind of departments that are working on it. It's the first time something of this scale has happened in our community where the community organizations have come together. So it's very much a community effort. We are trying to make sure people have clean underwear and socks and food, and that they have the information translated. There's a lot of services that the city's supplying. There's an Uber line for them because their cars were flooded out. A lot of these people left their homes on boats.
The city of Detroit moved 662 people into hotels while the Great Lakes Water Authority and the city worked on cleanup and repairs. So where are we now in the recovery process? And is there something that could have been done to prevent this? To discuss this, we have Great Lakes Water Authority CEO Suzanne Coffey here. Suzanne, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you very much.
So it was said that it will take roughly 6 weeks to do repairs and cleanup. We're 2 weeks in. Could you tell us where are we now in terms of cleanup and repairs, and what does the water line look like now?
So I think it's a great opportunity to give everyone an update on where we are. The pipe has been replaced. The piece of pipe that broke has been repaired, replaced, new hatch put in. We have actually done what we do typically is we will encase that the section that broke, the new section, in concrete. That's what we do. That really is a very stable way to make sure that this particular pipe, that there isn't an issue with it again. As we continue to try to what we would call come up out of the hole, right? So our pipe's deeper. Detroit, the city, DWSD, has a 6-inch water main that also broke in that hole. So this week focus is for DWSD to be able to repair that. We've done our work that will allow DWSD to now get in and make that repair. There's also a DTE gas line that has been shut off that needs to be repaired. So those two repairs will occur. The antennas this week, and that to be done before we can get up all the way out of the ground and do something like a temporary pavement type of a restoration until the weather gets warmer to do a permanent pavement restoration.
So, Suzanne, it sounds like, though, the biggest issue has been worked on and repaired then, which is the huge water main break, that water line. And now there are the other two issues to deal with in terms of a water main from the city and DTE's gas line.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so the flooding happened because, as we've discussed, a water main broke. Could you talk about why it broke in the first place?
Yeah, so when we pulled the pipe out, there's a few things that we do. We do a very detailed forensic analysis, sending parts of the pipe to labs, and we're going to continue, we've done that, we're going to continue along that path. That'll typically take weeks and months, but the engineer's inspection of the pipe as the pipe came out of the ground, there was a bottom welded seam that gave way. You likely saw some pictures of that, so you could see this was on the bottom of the pipe, what we would call longitudinally, the long way on the pipe. That seam came apart. That looks like it perhaps was a defective weld. The pipe is 90 plus years old, so that weld would have occurred, been manufactured 90 years ago, right? And not something we could have seen, and not something we could have detected, even with the type of inspection technology that we have today, right? We've come a long way. And I've said before, these pipes weren't intended to get in and be inspected regularly. Back when they were put in, the thought was they'd all be dug up and replaced. We don't have the kind of funding to do that type of a replacement program. And we can get in and do some inspections. But that type of failure, the type of failure we saw, would not even have been detected in an inspection with today's inspection techniques.
Okay, so regardless of the age of the main, this is something that could have been an issue, but it does have me wondering. As you noted, this was an old line from the 1930s. If we replaced our water lines more often, would this kind of thing be preventable? Or is it true that regardless of how up to date it is, sometimes our infrastructure is just going to break?
So I think both of those are true, but the first statement's the best statement. If we were able to go in and do more proactive replacements, it would minimize these kinds of disruptions. We haven't seen something like this densely populated area. We've had larger pipes break, don't get me wrong. And the reality is water mains will break. That's that second piece of what you said. It's going to happen. The idea is to minimize it, though. Minimize the frequency and minimize the disruption to the public. If we had replaced these pipes more frequently, say, for example, if 40 years ago we had put a replacement program in place to replace all these pipes, perhaps that wouldn't have happened. It's not where we are with our funding these days. The best we can do these days is proactively, identify which pipes we should get in, the ones that have the highest consequence of failure, the older ones, to do what we can to get in and inspect or renew. Sometimes the best thing to do is to line a pipe that's in place, not dig it all up. I many times will make these comments about, we talk about road funding and we talk about road repairs, and a lot of these pipes that we've got are very old and they're under the roads. We certainly can't, as the current funding structure provides, replace all these pipes because that would be replacing all the roads. We'd have done the roads if we could have by now. We certainly don't have the money to do the pipes. So we work with technology to try to get in them and perhaps do what we would call an in situ type of renewal, which would be perhaps lining a pipe like this.
You're listening to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're talking about the water main that broke in southwest Detroit and caused a lot of flooding, which displaced people from their homes. Our guest is Great Lakes Water Authority CEO Suzanne Coffey. The Great Lakes Water Authority is responsible for that line. So, Suzanne, what has it been like for the Great Lakes Water Authority crew members being out there day in and day out? When it first occurred, it was extremely cold out there. We've seen the weather break a little bit for them. So what does it look like?
So for our team members, this is what we do. We understand that in some cases we're first responders. Very typically we're out doing regular work, right? But we work outside all the time and our teams work outside all the time. But on occasion, as we had talked about before, water mains do break. So working in the cold is part of what we do. We have emergency contracts with contractors to come in and assist us in these repairs. These types of things are all hands on deck. And although the weather could slow it down, it doesn't stop the production of it. It is part of what we do. We understand this is part of the business we're in.
And Suzanne, just listening to what Anita said earlier, this was not a natural disaster, but it kind of felt as if it was for the folks who live in that community. So have we seen this extent of a fix or repair from the Great Lakes Water Authority ever for the crew members?
So we have, what we haven't seen is this much public effect, this much negative impact on the public, right? We've had a couple other large diameter water mains break. We had a 4-foot diameter pipe break a few years ago on 14 Mile Road. We had a 10-foot diameter pipe break a couple years ago up in a farmer's field. So when these things happen and they're not in a heavily populated area, it's the same thing for us to go back in and get the pipe repaired. But the public involvement in this case was unprecedented. We have never had a public safety emergency like this and this scale because of one of our pipes breaking.
And, just speaking of last week, the Great Lakes Water Authority Board voted to approve a 5.9% hike for water and a 4.5% hike for sewage. That was a few percentages lower than initially suggested by the agency as well. GLEWA has said that it needs these hikes for capital improvements and for raising costs of chemicals. Now, what do you mean when you say capital improvements and chemicals?
Yeah, so capital improvements is a fancy way of saying construction projects. Yeah. Pipe renewals. We were just talking about renewing pipes or replacing pipes. Those are all what we call capital improvements. Our budget has two big parts. It has a capital improvement, which is construction work. We have treatment plants. Obviously, we have pipes, pump stations, reservoirs, those types of things. They need to be renewed. The asset that we talked about in the first part of this segment is old. We have other very old assets as well. And so capital improvements are construction projects. The chemical piece, so a good example, something that's really relatable, we have seen significant skyrocketing of chlorine since the pandemic. Just a crazy increase in it. I think something like 40% increase in chlorine. And we use chlorine to disinfect water. On the drinking water side, it's used, and on the wastewater side, as we treat the wastewater before it's discharged to the Great Lakes. And so the chlorine piece and the chemical piece, there are other chemicals that we use as well, electricity, these types of things. That's on the operating side of our budget. We've been tallying up the last 9 years of our charge increases. On the water side, if you average them over 9 years, the average is less than 3% increase per year. And on the wastewater side, less than 2%. So we've been able to keep the pricing low. We had a lot of contracts that locked in pricing when we started to see the skyrocketing of the costs. But after a while, these are public procurements. They only go for a certain period of time. And after a certain period of time, we got to rebid them out. And those higher numbers are now coming home to roost. And we are not for profit. I think there was, some people think we're profit making. We are not. So every bit of the money that we get through charges goes to pay our expenses. And that's how we work that budget. We look at what the expenses are for the coming year, and we say that's what we need to collect.
And Suzanne, before we let you go briefly, if you can, Oakland County Water Commissioner Jim Nash has said that those rate increases aren't enough and that the Great Lakes Water Authority will need to raise its rates again in the future. Do you think your agency should have been raising rates more in the past than it had because now it needs to compensate for not having raised those rates?
So I think that's a good question. Could we have in retrospect? Absolutely, we could have tried, right? One of the things that happens, though, is we take a look at what we're spending every single year and what our capacity to spend is. For example, we can only build a certain number of capital improvement projects, those construction projects, right? So we look every year and say, what can we do next year? What do we need? And every year we try in the public interest to keep the charges as low as possible. But Commissioner Nash is right. We will need in the future to continue to increase our charges. And I don't think this is something that is unique to GLWA. The water sector as a whole, we've heard for a couple decades now, aging infrastructure. The water pipes are in that category, and a lot of the pipes are beginning to reach the end of their useful life, or the other mechanical equipment. And most water utilities generally feel that they need more funding in order to meet the expectational level of service of the public, to do more renewals and really respond to what's happening in the economy with inflationary increases, because that hits us too, just the same way it hits your home budget.
Great Lakes Water Authority CEO Suzanne Coffey, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro this morning.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.